right, it is officially 6:15 on the East Coast. So we'll definitely get started right now. To everyone that's joining now and in the future, welcome to the Shades of Motherhood Moms Navigating Racism panel here at the Amplifying Her Voice Mother's Day Summit. So excited to have you guys here today. My name is Brenda Miller, and I'm the moderator for this conversation today. I have a podcast called Moms Hustle Different, where I talk with Black women about navigating work and motherhood. And I'm super excited to talk to this panel today about how we navigate racism as moms and also as women. So I would love for each of you just to take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about you, about your professional background. If you're a mom, you can share little details about that. And just share where you're coming from in this particular conversation. So tell us where you're from, all of that. So we will start. I have Hera here first. So go ahead and start and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. I apologize for the background noise. My kids are being completely ridiculous right now. My name is Hera McLeod. I am a proud single mother by choice, and I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I have two daughters, ages 2 and 7. I'm also an author and a civil rights activist. I focus mainly on women's and children's issues. And I am the co-host of a podcast called the Mocha Single Mothers by Choice podcast. And essentially what this is our podcast provides information to a community of Black women who either are currently single mothers by choice, women considering being a single mother by choice, or actively pursuing this non-traditional path to motherhood. And so we discuss topics like fertility, choosing a sperm donor, where are all the Black sperm donors, which is a thing, dating as a single parent, and more. And I am also a principal manager at Microsoft.
Welcome. We'll go next to Viola. You got to take yourself off mute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Viola Rumskin. I call myself a recovering lawyer. I practiced for about 14 years before I made the shift into what I'm doing now, which is consulting and facilitation, primarily because of my deep love gathering people and facilitating difficult conversations. So I just love the way groups form and develop. And I got into the study of how to maintain great bonds. So my target population is women, and I'm so glad that I could be among women talking about race at this time, in this hour, in this generation, because I think that there's a lot of self-awareness that we could bring to the table and elevate the discussion and lift the ball up. So I'm happy to be here, excited to jump into this conversation with all of you.
Excited to have you. Marilyn, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let's go, while you get in that in order, let's go to JL, and then we'll figure out what's going on in the back end for you, Marilyn.
Hi, everyone. My name is JL Joseph. I am a journalist, a podcast producer, an MC, and a mom of 2 boys under the age of 9. I am also the founder of Black Iron Girl, which is an online magazine and a podcast. And what it does is it's a culmination of profiles of women, specifically of Caribbean and African heritage. I also host a video cast and podcast called Faculty of Jail, which is currently in its 4th season. And I'm happy to be here this evening to share some of the things that I really, truly enjoy writing about or even discussing, culture, race, and I contribute to a few online magazines, publications in Canada and in the Caribbean, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Crystal and then we'll come back to you, Marilyn, okay?
Good evening, good afternoon, no matter what time zone people are in. I'm Crystal Henry, and I am coming from Baltimore, Maryland. I am mom to one son, and I write a blog entitled Around the Way Mom, and I'm very passionate about being a Black woman and very, very serious about raising a Black son in the 21st century amidst all of what is happening worldwide. So I am looking forward to our discussion today. And, you know, again, I have a lot of admiration and respect for everyone's personal background and what they are bringing to this discussion today. So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about it.
Thank you so much. Let's see, Marilyn, can we hear you? It looks like you're off mute. Okay. Looks like she hopped off and probably come back in. So I just want to say I'm so excited to have this conversation. If you are in the session and you want to chat, you want to ask a question, you want to join the conversation, you want to co-sign on anything that anyone is saying, feel free to make sure that you click the session tab on the right. It should have a blue line under it, and then you can start typing and share and co-sign. Let us know that you're here. Let us know that you're listening. Say hello, because we're excited to not only have this conversation between each other as sisters, as women, but to have the conversation with you. And then we've also put on the back end just a little bit of time to have Q&A and to ask questions and to answer any questions that may come up throughout the session. So if you have some, just put it in there, know that I'm watching and that we'll address those at the end. But we'll definitely tag in Marilyn as she comes back in. But I do want to just go ahead and start because we have such amazing women here on the panel. So what I wanted to kind of start off with is basically just understanding everyone's perspective, our background. We all know that going into racism is a heavy topic. Oh, there's Marilyn.
Can everybody
there you
hear me
go.
now?
Go ahead and yes, we can hear you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, I completely froze up. But my name is Marilyn Aldwani. I'm all peaceful.
Hey, Marilyn.
Black.
We're having some kind of feedback on your end. So I don't know if you're connected to your Wi-Fi or if you're in a good spot, because we are it was getting a little jarbled when you were talking. It was going in and out a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to mute. You guys continue, and I will see if I can get some support from tech support.
Okay, cool. So with that, I mean, this stuff always happens. What are we in a virtual world for a whole year now? Like, you just never know. No matter how much you prepare, stuff happens. So we'll definitely try to get that situated. But this conversation is so important to talk about what racism looks like, and not just, oh, woe is me, we're dealing with racism in our society, because we are, and that's a reality. But be able to go through and talk about how we can provide solutions, how we can deal with what we're encountering. So we're hoping to have that kind of discussion throughout the conversation, but we'll start off with, we have a wide variety of women here, and I kind of want to know a little bit more about your perspective, where you're coming from when you talk about racism, your experiences. I love to start with JL. Like, I know that you have varying experiences internationally. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you've experienced discrimination or racism in the work that you're doing.
So I am I'm Dominican, so I come, well, I'm Dominican and Canadian. I was born in an island called Dominica and raised there until my teen years. And then I moved to Canada as a teenager. And my experiences, first of all, can go back through somewhat colorism into racism, because growing up in the Caribbean, you don't really experience quote unquote direct racism because most of the people that you interact with are Black, right? Or they're mixed Black, but majority, you are the majority in the Caribbean. You move to North America and you're now exposed to racism. And for somebody coming from the Caribbean, it's not very it's not something that we easily can detect in terms of racism. And I'm speaking for myself, but a lot of people might share the similar opinion. And based on my research as a journalist, I found that a lot of people shared similar experiences where we're not able to identify right away when someone is being racist. Or for example, I'll give you an example. I worked part-time at a beauty boutique. It was a cosmetologist shop. You could come and buy your makeup and you get tested and all of these different things. And I remember a white woman saying to me, how are you going to know what shade I am at? You can't tell my shade. And I'm like, am I blind? To me at that time, I looked at it as, in that moment, I looked at it as ignorance and not somebody actually discriminating against me. I just saw it as, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. And many times I've come across instances where people have reacted to me in a negative way and I've brushed it off and said, having a bad day, ignorant person, and I just kept on moving, because that is what is kind of instilled in me from my upbringing, where I don't really know what to expect. I mean, I've never been called the N-word, so I never really experienced it that way. But in terms of the colorism aspect of it, I remember, when my son first one year, my son, we visited Dominica, and somebody said to him, "Oh, you're darker than your mom. You're so much." So there's like this thing that if you're too dark, you're not good. You're not as good looking, or you're not as pretty if you're too dark, right? And he came back to school, in Canada, and I remember him saying to me, why are the other students in my class lighter than me? And he started really realizing that there were other students that are lighter than him, not before. Like it happened after somebody brought it to his attention that he was darker than his mom, right? And I had to literally try to knock that out of him, because every time he would always be so concerned about even when I had my second son, who looks a lot like me, who's even lighter than me, he was, why is Jazz lighter than me, and I'm darker? And he had a phobia. And I constantly, every day, I have to, remind him that you're beautiful, handsome boy, and you look just like your daddy, and your daddy's handsome. I have to constantly keep telling him this so that he does not, have in his mind that because he is darker or darker skin, darker shade, that he is less beautiful. So this was really my experience where racism and discrimination, or even colorism, is concerned, coming from the Caribbean and moving to North America.
Interesting. I know that sometimes we have our own perspective in the United States on colorism, on racism, etc. But interesting to see how it plays out in the Caribbean as well. I know, Hera, you had an experience that you shared with us before about with your daughter and the things that she's heard. I'd love for you to share that story with us.
So I will say that becoming a mom and experiencing these things through my children has made me have so much more respect for my parents and what they went through when I experienced it in the 80s. And it's interesting because, hearing JL talk about how her experience with colorism and with race, where she's from, you look sometimes, like if you step back at like what's happening in America, you're like, gosh, like we are so crazy. We have such weird views on race here. And I can imagine as an outsider coming in, you guys are probably like, what is wrong with you people, right? And so I think the thing that I realized as a parent was that I had all these ideas of like when my kids were going to be old enough to have like the race conversation. And what I didn't realize is initially, like it goes down on the playground, right? Like these kids are going to make you have that conversation before you're ready to have that conversation. And so what it looks like for me was my daughter was in first grade and she started asking me about, she started becoming obsessed with homelessness, like all of a sudden. And I was like, where is this coming from? And she's like, well, what happens when you're homeless? And let's go see where the homeless people live. And so it wasn't until a couple of months later where it trickled out that someone in her class had told her that all Black people end up homeless and criminal. And so she was terrified, thinking, well, we're Black, so we're going to be homeless and criminal. And so it was right around that time that I realized that I had to explain to her, okay, this is a racist myth. I needed her to understand, like, honey, I know you're only 6 years old, but this is racism and this is what it looks like, right? And then I also had to reevaluate the school she was in and the neighborhood we lived in and the city we lived in, because I looked around us and I was like, we are the only Black family in this neighborhood and she's one of few Black kids at this school. And so I actually picked up my 2 kids, drove across country during the pandemic to move them to a Blacker city and intentionally live in a Blacker neighborhood, because I was like, I have to show my kids lots of variety of Blackness. I want them to walk out our door and see our Black neighbors, next door, across the street. I need this to be normal, and I need them to see Black excellence everywhere, because I can't have, like, I have to have a chance to combat some of the negativity that they're going to inevitably experience in life.
Something. I mean, I think that's with every conversation that you have with your kids. In your mind, you come up with your timeline and what that looks like.
Like, oh, like 10? And like, no, 6. And yeah. I'm like, how is this a thing? Like at 6? And, I blame the parents. Like, I mean, I know it had to start somewhere. And so I'm looking at these parents with a side eye thinking, like, your 6-year-old is coming to my school telling my kid this, right? So obviously, in America, we have lots of work to do. And this work is not on the shoulders of simply us, but I can't wait for America to come around and stop being crazy. So,
I mean, it's hard. It's hard out here trying to figure out, how do you have these conversations? What do you do when your kids are experiencing racism? I know, Marilyn, like, you get to your back. So let's see if we can introduce yourself. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story and how you and your son had experienced racism that kind of starts your story off. Let's try to push through and see what we can do. It's still not, it's still sounding jumbled. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on.
So let's see here.
Okay, talk.
Try muting. Try turning off your video and talk so that just your audio comes through. It could be an interference with it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, am I clear?
Go ahead.
Okay, hurry up. So my name is Marilyn Aldway. I'm an unschooling mother of 3. My oldest is 20 and my youngest is 8 months.
Like it sounds almost like you're going through a one of those little cycles or something, like it's speeding up. Oh, that stinks. Man, I don't know what's happening because you have a great story that I want everybody to hear. Okay. But let's pause for a second. We'll try to see if we could get you some additional support because I really want you to be able to participate in the conversation. But I think that it's really interesting just the fact that even when we're raising young kids, we're having to navigate racism, and we already have to navigate it on our own terms. And I think it would be interesting to hear from you guys, like how do you navigate racism in your own life? How do you deal with it in your own spaces? And then also, how do you navigate the challenges, the conflicts that come to place? I know Viola, you have a lot of experience in having tough conversations with people and being able to, if we experience these traumatic things with our children, how do we have conversations with people that we may still need to deal with in the future? How do we talk through those things? Could you help us a little bit on what that could look like?
Yeah. So, when Marilyn was trying to get in, I thought about this story. A friend of mine and I were talking about, she has a podcast, and we were talking about this whole idea of how do we spark relationships across racial lines. And so one of the things that she's been doing is talking to people about when was the time you experienced race, of a little child. When was the first time you knew that race mattered? Example of somebody that she talked to who said he would come home all the time talking about this girl called Lucy, right? And his parents were so excited. He's white. His parents were so excited that he had all these stories to talk about. Lucy, so smart. Lucy this, Lucy that, Lucy that. And one day on a Sunday after church, they go to a grocery store and he's like, "Oh, Lucy." And automatically dawns on his parents that the Lucy this kid has been raving about is Black, right? So back up 35 years ago, so not a long time ago. And he could tell from the way they looked that there was something wrong with his love and admiration and his crush for Lucy. But his parents never told him why, after that point, they wouldn't encourage him talking about Lucy. So when he plays it back, his first experience of race was that incident, right? So I think that when we're thinking about how do we talk to our children about race, I think we have to, first of all, kind of center ourselves, right? We're talking to our children about race, but what does that mean? What are our own triggers, right? So to be able to have these conversations and to mine the information out of our children, we definitely have to be very self-aware, because how they experience racism is not necessarily the way we experience racism. And it is racism, right? So I think the first way to think about how do we get to talk about these things is that we need to talk to ourselves. How are we experiencing race? What have we experienced, right? And what is the range of the racism that we are now conscious exists in our world? So I think the first step really is to just to be self-aware, to observe. So a little bit of what JL has talked about, to be self-aware, to observe, and then to go through the process of interpretation, right? What about what I'm observing is filtered through the lens of my trigger? And then the last part of it will be to, how do I intervene, right? And you would do this in any sequence. So how do I intervene? How do I tell my child that she's precious, she's loved, she's worthy of love and respect, not only from me, right? But from the community she's a part of. And these are the things that she should bring to me. When we feel rejected, we feel shame, and shame often means we're hiding things. So I think it's a layered conversation, but I think it's one that we can train ourselves to have if we're having these self-dialogues about self-awareness. This is how this is making me feel, and as a result of this, I am going to be acting X, Y, and Z way, so that we can have conversations with our children from a more centered place. I think Marilyn was is in. I could hear your mic on, so I'll stop right there and hand it back to Brett.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to take that that side and really thinking about how we can be self-aware and use that time sometimes, because we can be heated when things are in the moment and happening, and we're just like, what? Your child is telling my child about racism and telling them that Black people are homeless. Like, I want to go to your house. I want to knock down your door and tell you something. You know, we can have all types of feelings that come across. We might not always act on them, but we have those feelings. We're sitting there and we want to tell somebody when they're telling us one child is lighter than the other or whatever else, and saying like, look, don't start that stuff in my household. They were fine before you started bringing up those conversations. So we have to kind of have that awareness, and then also be able to figure out how we're going to intervene in these situations in ways that won't harm our children. So I think that that's a super helpful point there. I'd love to know from you guys, like, how you have also tried to develop, we just lost, but how we try to develop a community of support to keep ourselves from like having these types of situations, or to help with those situations. I know, Hera, you just talked about moving across the country just so your daughters could be in a place that you felt like they could have some cultural, that has some cultural significance. I know, Marilyn, you have an entire unschooling community that really helps to support women and families really who are trying to get out of the public school space or the traditional space. I know, Crystal, that you have a platform that's specifically tailored towards Black moms and Black parents. And Jo, you have a mentoring organization. So I would love to hear more from any of you guys about how you establish community and how you how you can show up for others, for your child to advocate in these types of situations.
I can go. So part of what I was hearing really from Hera and from Viola was this idea that what our kids learn, they start learning at home. Whoever the kids were, you know, Hera, that approached your kids or your daughter on the playground, they obviously learned that, you know, at 5 and 6 and 7 years old from somebody at home. So it starts with what we do at home and the messages that we are sending, just even in some of those little nuances, right? Like, I can remember growing up and with my grandparents and even with my parents who were baby boomers, one of the things they would often say was, well, were they white or were they Black? And so I kind of grew up having that in my head, that anytime, just discussing a story, that helped them to better frame, who they were talking about or give some extra context. And so I don't do that same thing with my son, but what I do to create community is being very purposeful about what he is involved in, right? So we live in a pretty mixed neighborhood. And so it wasn't that I wanted him to be right now just in an all white school environment, because that's not the way that the world looks, honestly, and not the way that it looks for us here in Baltimore. So I'm purposeful about where he is spending his time. I'm purposeful about, the people that he is around and who he is spending his time with in an extracurricular way, so that he's exposed to different things, related to sports and activities and, the arts and whatever else it may be. And then for me to spend some time with other moms who do look like me so that we can be able to have a safe space to have these discussions. So they may be moms in different industries, professionally, but we are still experiencing some of the same things. And then too, branching out to be able to talk with moms who are white, moms who are Asian, moms who identify, who have different sexual orientations. So again, it is extending my personal network so that I can learn from others. And then likewise, having my son to be exposed to others as well, so that he can develop a greater sense of awareness, more knowledge, greater sensitivity as he is growing up.
I think that is super important to provide that balance. And like you said, as we're trying to be that example in our own households for what we would want other households to do, to really show varying sides of people and individuals and let them see diversity in another way, in like your own structured way of the people that you bring in so that they can see good examples in those areas. Does anybody else want to talk more about that?
So I want to go back to something that Viola said. I thought it was really great that she, explained that we have to be self-reflective and, recognize when you're essentially getting triggered. And I think that one of the things that's really great about leveraging community support when it comes to the conversations or, talking to your kids is that sometimes, at least in my own experience, I recognize like, I can't have this conversation because I am triggered and I don't want to project my feelings about the scenario onto my poor child who has just gone through a racist experience, right? Or in my situation, having to explain to my kids what Black Lives Matter movement meant. I was getting triggered by television and my own experiences with police brutality. And so when my daughter was asking me these questions, I was like incapable of really explaining it to her in a way that didn't make her police. And so luckily I was able to leverage my community. And I said to my dad, I was like, I need you to talk to her. And he did a really good job of essentially explaining, his life and how it was growing up in Mississippi as a Black man in the 60s and, giving her some historical perspective on what's going on and also helping her feel safe in the middle of all of that, which I was incapable of doing in that moment. So I will definitely say that, community is super important and surrounding yourselves with people that can help carry that load, because it's really impossible to be everything for your kids at all times.
I love that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh, okay. I can speak. Go ahead. Go ahead if you'd like to.
I just wanted to do a yes and to what Harris said about community and the leveraging community, right? So as a darling auntie to a whole brood of nieces, I find myself in that role so many times, right? Where I am helping a sister mom process, and I am holding up a mirror, right, to help her reframe whatever she needs to reframe, to help her get her points down so that she can communicate in the most clear and effective way to move, to move the discussion or to make the point, right? And so I'm just so happy that Harris said that, because that's exactly what we as women need to be leveraging in this hour, right? That so many more of us are concerned and so many more of us want to be allies, want to stand together with each other. So we should be looking to cultivate community very deliberately, specifically to deal with this. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yes, that's fantastic. I mean, that's really good information. From a Caribbean standpoint, though, it's very, very different. from that lens, because a lot of times, what I've started doing is starting to show Black Caribbean people, first we have to be appreciative and acknowledge our Blackness, and that is something that Caribbean people seem to struggle with. I almost lost a friendship of just a few weeks ago with a Black woman, a Caribbean woman. Well, she says she does not identify as a Black person, and I'm like, I was trying to figure out, like, you have boys, like, what's going to happen to them when they eventually move from the Caribbean and they move to North America? What sort of what are you teaching them in terms of you being mixed? Yes, we're mixed with all these different ethnicities, because we're my grandmother is indigenous, my grandfather, we have white in us, you know, like very strong, very, very strong traits of different cultures. But what do you say to when you tell your son that, oh, I don't like to be called Black, or Black is considered negative, you know, like, so all of these things. So I felt the need to do Black Island Girl, which is somewhat like retraining your mind to see Black as something good, because Black is always seen, there's white and there's Black, and everybody sees white as white in terms of color, not necessarily race, as being the nicer thing, whereas Black is darkness, and Black is this, and Black is that, and we don't like our Black hair, or we don't have good hair, or we, you know, all of these different things. I'm really telling my kids that you have good hair, regardless of what hair you have. Your hair grows to the sun. I mean, who else hair grows to the sun, right? We're like defying gravity here, you know, like I have to constantly like tell him these things, you know, to let him know that, listen, you are eventually going to be in a space where you might be called the N-word, and you might be called Black and ugly, or you might be called all these different things, but I'm not telling him directly that. I'm trying to like reinforce that, hey, you gotta love your Blackness, you know. So me maintaining my hair natural and all of these different things are ways in which I feel like I can really show my boys, because raising boys is different than completely different than raising girls, you know. Show my boys that, hello, you have to love the skin you're in. Mommy will do extra stuff now and again. We'll do it, but it's an enhancement. It's not to change who she is as a person, you know. That I'm not trying to make myself prettier. I'm just trying to enhance what's there, you know. And I mean, it's so difficult having these kinds of conversations, you know, with our kids. And you know, my son had a thing about his nose, you know, and I'm like, well, what's wrong with your nose? There's nothing wrong with your nose, you know. So it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, all of these conversations, I mean, getting tough, critical conversations with the people around us, as well as with our own family and our own children, setting boundaries for the people around us as well, for how they talk about our children, or the things that they say, or the conversations that they have, and just being careful that the things that you're implementing in your children, the confidence that you're putting into them, are enforced by the people around them. And I think that that's also something that I think is important too. Marilyn, let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Can we hear you? Yeah, for right now, let's go ahead and try.
Okay, I'm making another attempt.
It's like as soon as you introduce yourself, then it goes slow. Well, what I definitely, yeah, if you could put in the chat, Marilyn, like how you have kind of created this unschooling community, and what that means and what that has meant to you and how that has transformed others, I think that would be super helpful, because that just really interests me in general, is how we kind of develop those types of communities and that specific community. So just share a little bit with us about that in the chat. I wish we could hear you say it because I feel like it's more transformative when we do that, but we got to work with what we got right now. And I know, Hera, you also have established a community as well for moms who are in similar spaces as you. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, a group of us, so Single Moms by Choice, I don't know how many of you know what that is, but essentially it's a mom who from the inception decides like, I'm going to do this by myself, right? So be it like, anonymous donor, maybe known donor, you decide like there's not going to be anybody else financially responsible for this kid and I'm not co-parenting with anyone, right? And so the space of Single Moms by Choice is very white in general. There's lots of us out there. Many of the spaces are very white. So a group of us came together and we were like, we need a Black space to talk about some of these issues. And part of the reason was, some of the issues, while we do participate in the larger space as well, sometimes you just want to talk about your fertility with your sisters, right? Like you want to talk about maybe some of the things that impact us with medicine that, our white sisters don't necessarily have the same experience with. So as part of our virtual community, we have lots of chats about like, how people go about getting pregnant, what factors in with age. On the podcast, we have brought on people from sperm banks because one of our biggest things is like, there's actually a shortage of Black donors out there. So if you're a Black woman who wants a Black donor, as many of us do, pickings are slim, which is a whole different conversation. But I definitely wanted to also talk quickly about solutions. There's a lot of times when you talk about racism and race and mothering, it can be like a little bit of a downer. And I think one of the things that I try to do in my house is really affirm Blackness. And I said this a little bit about like why I moved and whatnot, but I think that, the challenge we have as Black moms raising Black kids is that society is not affirming them the way that society would necessarily affirm a white child, right? And so we, in some ways, have to go overboard, or perhaps this is just my own feeling of such. But, I try to be intentional about saying things to them like, oh, your curls are popping today, and just really like make them feel good about how they look and, talk to them like, wow, like I love how you tan and you get this like really great glow about you, because that you want them leaving your house feeling like, yeah, I look great today, because they're not necessarily going to hear that anywhere else. So in my house, we're just very unapologetically Black, and I want my kids to know that like it's a source of pride, and I want them to feel that when they go out into the world.
Yes, I love that. I think that when I look at my son and I'm just trying to affirm where he's smart, where he's doing great, the things that he's doing, even when sometimes he's annoying, as all of our kids can be sometimes, I try to really enforce that. I know, Crystal, you've talked about on your platform a lot about that, about having the conversations that you. Could you share a little bit about kind of how you chose when and how to talk to your son about racism?
Well, pretty much like Hera did, I had to start the talk before I was really prepared to do it. And it really came about probably last summer. So, he happened to be watching the news as we were looking at news coverage when George Floyd was killed. And I did not turn it away. Obviously I was sensitive to what was just too much exposure, because even for me, sometimes it was just too much. But again, as he had questions, I answered them. And one of the things I did was I had created this, I guess it's like an infographic, but some suggestions for how to talk to your kids about racism. So in one of my suggestions was 0 to 6, right? I'm looking at it here. You can talk about and celebrate differences. You can read books about African and Black history. You can educate yourself on laws, policies, and history. And then you can demonstrate anti-racist behavior in public and at home. And then for 7 to 10, with my son being 9, I said, ask questions to gauge their understanding, listen to their feelings, give information in small doses, and then share facts and the impact that they have on you, and then practice affirmations. And I went into 11 to 14 and 15 plus. But that piece about sharing information in small doses, I think, again, as these things happen in the world, it's a lot for the adults to process. But we should be mindful that our kids' ability to process these broader concepts and these very deeply rooted issues can be overwhelming and sometimes just too much for them. So letting them guide the conversation. So I didn't push him as he asked questions. I answered them honestly. Things that I did know, things that I didn't know. I told him I would get the answers, but I didn't hide behind, we're just not going to talk about this right now. You're just not old enough for this right now. Because at 9 years old, when he goes out into the world, someone looks at him and looks at his hair. They look at his skin. They look at his body. They look at me and his dad, and they will create a judgment. And I need him to understand that and to be aware of it, not to be afraid, but to be aware. So for me, it's about building awareness and then arming him with knowledge and with information and with strategies, but not to be afraid, right? Like we don't want to live in fear. We want to live in the knowledge that we have and be empowered by that knowledge. And then, just like Hera was saying, I affirm who he is. I don't make any bones about it. I'm a Black woman and I'm proud to be. And his dad doesn't make any bones about it. And I see that pride developing in him the more that he is coming to understand who he is in the world. And I know that as he gets older, his other experiences will help to, to further shape that. But, that's one of those strategies is I want to be honest with him. I want to give him information in those small doses and then allow him to lead with the questions, and then I can follow him from there.
That we really do have to make age appropriate judgments. And then also remember that some things are too much for us. So I know sometimes when I catch these videos and I tell myself, oh, I'll just watch it this time. And I'm like, I'm in a funk for the rest of the day because I expose myself to it. So being able to kind of add exposure in those small doses to say like, all right, if I know this is too much for me, I know this is too much for a little person, and kind of providing them with the right way and the right exposure, and then balancing it off with pride in ourselves. And that's what we've all been talking about today. It's just, how can we counter racism? It sounds like a big way to counter racism in our lives and in what we're experiencing in our family units is to counter it with affirmations, with pride, with excitement about who you are, with letting our children know that they are beautiful, that they are handsome, that they are smart, and really just being advocates for them. I know for myself, I just moved to Georgia. I'm in a county south of Atlanta, so I'm not quite in Atlanta proper. So I'm a little south, and I'm in a pretty mixed county and area and neighborhood, and it's completely different from me. I grew up in a county that was 90%, Black. And I'm trying to tell myself like, okay, Brenda, how do you deal with this? And he was in a daycare at first where I was like, okay, like this is all right. But I was so nervous because my son is smart. My son knows different things and they were not challenging him. And I was like, I'm not going to start this early. Y'all not going to see my little Black kid and say that he's smart, but still not challenge him. No. So I ended up changing him to another daycare where they spend more time with him, where they put him with older kids to make sure that he's still learning, that they really care for him in that way and care that he grows. And I think that that's something that we can also do as adults and as moms, is really just advocate for our children and their gifts and the things that they do so that they can succeed and that they can continue to grow and that they can have confidence outside of what racism they may encounter in the future. Because I know I have this fear of the day where my son is seen as a threat and not as a cute kid. Because people, oh, he's cute. I'm like, all right, he's 2.5. When does that change? When is that moment that changes? So just really being able to continue to have those conversations and expose him to the beauty of Blackness, expose him to things. So I just wanted to kind of say my little spiel there. That's how I feel as a mom of a 2-year-old, but it's so helpful hearing from you guys who have more experience in this. And I feel like I want to start a support group, like moms navigating all of these things so we can all support each other as we do this. So let's see, Marilyn, you came back. Let's try you one more time because we really want to hear your story.
Okay, how is it sounding?
Just go ahead and talk and let's see what we can do.
Okay, all right. So
it's still not working. It's still not working, Marilyn. I wish it was, though. I know that in our conversations before, because I do want to make sure that whether in the chat or whatever else, like you had this whole experience that you talked about where you realized that your son was not getting the type of attention that he needed, and I think maybe even negative attention, and you made the choice to take your son out of school and to homeschool him. And I thought that and really unschool him. And if you could share more about that in the chat, that would be great, because I think that that was one of those decisions that maybe not everybody can make. Maybe it is what people can make, but having that choice and knowing that that's an option is really cool. So if anybody is listening and they want to get more information about how to explore unschooling, how to explore homeschooling, definitely make sure you reach out to Marilyn. I'm sure the Wi-Fi and technology will be a lot better in your one-on-one conversations, but definitely reach out to her there for that. I did want to see if anybody else had anything they wanted to add about solutions and the things that we can do to navigate racism.
I just wanted to mention, and this is sort of towards Marilyn's platform, I think one of the things that is really great is, the fact that she was A, paying attention, right? And B, recognize, hey, this is not working for my kid. Let me find a solution that does work for my kid, right? And I think oftentimes parents don't do this enough. Like we just expect that the school is just going to do its job, right? Like, oh, of course it's going to educate our kid. And so I would stress, especially for Black parents, that you have to pay attention, like pull apart their backpack, pull out stuff, ask them questions about what's going on in schools. And even if unschooling or homeschooling isn't an option for you and your family situation, there's a lot of options that people don't realize they have, be it like charter school or perhaps a private school or perhaps moving to a different neighborhood or what have you, to get your kid in a situation that's working for them, or pushing your local school to actually do better.
That point about advocating and really going through and really, what are you doing? Did you get any homework today? I want to see it. I want to know what they're asking you to do. Let me see those grades. All of that. I remember those are things that my mom did for me that really helped me just have of trying to advocate for my child and making sure that the people who are responsible for them at school are actually doing what they need to do, and that you could be partners together for the continued education of your child. I know something that's also helped me a lot in my short parenting journey thus far, Facebook groups and establishing online communities. There are a lot of groups out there that are for everything, whether it's parenting toddlers or parenting school-age children or homeschooling or whatever else. There's so many people out there with lots of information, even Facebook groups in your community that will talk about when the charter school applications open. They'll talk about when these certain extracurricular activities are happening or when scholarships are available. So that's something that I've also found to be helpful is establishing online communities as well to find the information that you need so that either A, you can connect with other like-minded parents and individuals, and B, that you can get the information that you need to be able to advocate for your kids. So that's something that I found to be helpful so far. Does anybody else have any kind of last words to share? Okay, go ahead, Viola.
I just wanted to share that, it's interesting to me that many of us don't use the superpowers we already have, right? So we can multitask in our homes, we can champion the causes of others in our family, etc. We pick up the phone, we check on that auntie, we're helping out that cousin, we're helping out that nephew get in college, all of those superpowers, right? But oftentimes we don't use those same superpowers we have to navigate the system, right? Be it healthcare, which we've seen Black women suffering so much as it relates to dealing with the healthcare system, right? Or schools, right? So you don't have all this information that you need to push an issue with your teachers, with your child's teacher or the administration, but you have sisters, right? You have a sister that knows somebody that can come and help you, right? So I just think that it's critical that in this day and in this age, where women's voices are being heard, it's really time for us to amplify our voices, right? And whatever means, and that means that in whatever space we find ourselves, if we're not able to get that message across, well, when we next time we come into that room, we're not just coming as ourselves, we're coming with all the sisters and all the mothers and aunties that have gone before us. And we're finding ways to make sure that our voices are heard and our messages are communicated. So I want to encourage whoever is listening, whoever is part of the audience, look, a takeaway action is I don't have to deal with this by myself, right? So I might not be as equipped as Crystal or Jael or Hera or Brenda or Marilyn, but I know that if I have an issue that is not moving, I can call one person and say, who can help me? Who do you know that can help me? Talk to that principal, talk about this, talk to that, so that we're moving this. We need to move the ball. We need to lift up the ball and move it far beyond what other generations have been able to, because it's our time and we have better tools. So I just really wanted to encourage us to really amplify our voices, kind of the theme of the conference, but of the summit, but to really say that that's something that we need to begin to do deliberately, and even before it becomes a critical situation or crisis.
I love that. I love that. We really do. And that is a great out for us because sometimes we could be in these silos. We can say that we are super women and that we can handle things ourselves. But sometimes you got to figure out who you can talk to, who somebody knows, or if you don't know them, you figure out a way to get to them. We find ways so that we can make sure that our kids are taken care of. Anybody else have any last thoughts? Yes, JL.
I wanted to add as well is that, I know like Viola, before we met today, one of the things you spoke about, being a support to each other as black women, especially when you don't necessarily share the same background or the same culture. We may all be Black, but we're not necessarily from the same area or the same country, or even, we might have a Caribbean background, an African background, wherever it is. I really feel like we also need to ensure that we can support each other on, because so many things are different within our cultures, but our children being in the North American demographic will tend to face the exact same things, and we may not understand why they're going through this. And I'll tell you why I say this, because I know a lot of Caribbean Black people who've not rallied with the Black Lives Matter movement like they should. And a lot of it has to go with not having the experience and not understanding racism from that sphere, and just going with the flow and saying, okay, it's not my experience. Oh, okay, I've never experienced this, right? And being understanding to people, because, growing up in the Caribbean, we don't understand that, we don't put up that guard when somebody says something to us that is racist. We tend to be a little bit more dismissive of it, whereas we might see people who are born and who are raised in the situation be more on the defense and recognize it quicker. And I've had instances where friends have said, "You didn't see what she was saying to you? Did you see that was being racist?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't see it." So to be very aware and support each other while we're being aware that, everybody does not have the exact same experiences, but we can share, our experiences with others and get them, let them, help them understand that, hey, we're not being ignorant, or we're not trying to dismiss your situation. This is how I was raised, or this is where I was, and this is why, right? And granted, all our kids are all going to be in the same situation, because most of us, for us here, our kids are dealing with North America. They live in North America for the most part, right? So a lot of our kids are going to be faced with a lot of the similar issues that we, coming from all our different demographics, we have to be able to know how to deal with it, because we might just say, "Oh, it's okay." Or like a lot of Caribbean people, tend to sensationalize white people. So they might be like, "Oh, listen to the white child. The white child is right," or that even within. So we have to be very much aware of that before we can even move forward or even grab the ball and go with it, because at the end of the day, we might be grabbing the wrong ball. At the end of the day, we have to really, really know what we're going to say to our kids based on our history and the shared history now that they're part of, because we all come from different places.
Is one of the things that you said just made me think about. I know for myself growing up, it was, oh, so-and-so was talking white, or so-and-so talks like this, and being able to, sometimes we just like, look, if you talk however you talk, it doesn't mean that you're talking white or talking black. It just means that's how you talk and that's how you sound. And being able to, like we've all been saying, affirm who your children are, and not assigning discrimination or assigning these kind of features to another, to your children as well. Does anybody else have something? I just want to allow you guys to share a little bit more, if you want to share about your platforms or anything like that, as we're getting closer to the 7:30 Eastern mark. And I don't see any questions in the chat, so we might as well just share a little bit about your platforms and how people can reach out to you. So we'll start with Hera at the top. She's right.
Hey, so I guess I just wanted to also mention, not necessarily platform related, but I think sometimes we also have to realize that our kids don't necessarily experience racism the same way that we would imagine, and they also don't necessarily identify the way that we would imagine. I think, especially if, I think some of what JL shared about like her own background, not growing up in North America specifically, but then raising a child here, like what's interesting is like, understanding that the child may experience it different from you, and trying to understand like what that's like for them. And I think even if you end up raising a child in the same country that you grew up in, you're raising that child at a different time. And so, it's just super important to kind of understand, like, and ask them, like, how do you identify, right? Like, you might be very surprised with how they respond. I know I was when I went through that with my kids. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned my podcast. If you're a mom out there, maybe your fertility clock is ticking and you're like, I don't know that I want to push this relationship just because I want kids. And you're Black, reach out to us. We are the Mocha SMCs, or Single Mothers by Choice. Or maybe you're just curious and you want to hear about all things fertility and dating and the experience of single Black women, single moms. Check us out at the Mocha Single Moms by Choice podcast. You can find us pretty much on any platform that you use to find your podcasts.
And JL. You can share anything. You're on mute.
Just actually sending information to a friend of mine who is actually exploring that option. So I'm like, you gotta go listen to her. so I was in another
Send him our way.
because I didn't want to forget. So I'm like, let me do it right away, because if I get caught up and then I have to switch back to the next box. But I have a podcast called Black Island Girl, which is probably what I about mostly, and it's a podcast and a profile. So the online website. I just released the first article back in March. It was right before International Women's Day, and it touches on hair and how Black hair is empowering women of Caribbean heritage, and it also explores. It speaks about. It actually features 3 different women, but more importantly, the podcast is an extension of the articles. So people get to see a different side, how they grew up, how they got to how they are, and what makes them tick. And I want to encourage folks, if you have a moment, if you can, you can always hop on and listen to it. The podcast is not very long; it's only like 15 to 20 minutes, so you can literally get in and get. It goes a bit 1,000 words. If you like reading, you can go ahead as well. But focus on image and how we see ourselves as Black people. And that's why I started with the head, because I believe you start on the crown and you will work your way to the feet. So I'm trying to go with that flow, and hopefully I can change. My mission is to train, see us as beautiful people, Black, and everything Black as, and just really enforce that. So I want to encourage folks, and it was really nice being on here with you women, and opportunity as well as you, Brenda.
Yes, and Crystal.
Oh, Crystal Henry, and I created a blog called Around the Way Mom, and the real goal of it is to help moms to remember who we were before the kids came on the scene. So I make a point to focus on who we are as women, as partners, romantically, who we are as friends, family members, and then who we are in business, because the kids get accounted for anyway. But then we often will. So I do write about my experience as a mom, things that are related to me and things that are related to motherhood, things that are topics related to friendship and, being in business. And so that is what the blog is about. So I'm active on Instagram at Round the Way Mom, active on the blog, aroundthewaymom.com. And, really, again, helping to affirm who we are as women and who we are in the various realms and different parts of our lives outside of motherhood, because it is my belief that if we are able to address and to tap back into who we are in these other parts of our lives, and that can help to make us stronger as moms. And that is my goal. So thank you, Adrienne. We have whole lives, and it is important for us not to forget who we are. And, it doesn't mean that we get all day long to spend on ourselves. And that also doesn't mean that we get all day long to spend being mothers, but it should be something that we are actively doing to remember who we are. So yes, and I have I have enjoyed hearing from you ladies and being able to expand my understanding of what it looks like for you all to navigate racism in your various, parts of the world and with your kids and how you are living that out. So I've appreciated it. And thank you, Brenda, for leading this panel discussion so wonderfully. Thanks, Brenda.
I appreciate it. Viola, feel free to share.
All right. So I don't have a podcast, but I'm open to being a guest on any podcast. Not doing a blog. But right now you can find me on Twitter at @UverTrueViola. And I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. My name is Viola Rumskin. You can find me. I'll be happy to connect. I'm actually currently developing content for public speaking around the issues of immigrant women of color and how immigrant women of color process identity, belonging, and becoming. So I'm happy to talk about those topics. Those are topics that I'm passionate about. Those are topics that are dear to my heart. And of course, how we as the collective diaspora can come alongside immigrant women who have to navigate new countries, new systems, new ways of being in lands that they were not born in and did not grow up in, and how they get to assess what it means to belong in these spaces. So looking forward to connecting with all of you lovely ladies. This was such a treat. I'm so happy that I could be on with you. And thank you, Brenda.
You and Marilyn, I saw you put your information in the chat for the Peaceful Black Mama. So definitely check her out. Technical difficulties aside, she's definitely someone that you want to talk to and want to kind of hear from and hear her perspective around mothering and schooling and all of that. So definitely reach out to Marilyn, and we wish that the technology was working the way it was supposed to be able to really hear your story from your mouth, but you'll have to follow her to see people. And for me, again, I am Brenda Miller. I am the host of the Moms Hustle Different podcast. And I started the podcast shortly after I had my son, when I was going back to work. And I was like, what is this? What is this going back to work thing? And how is it that moms have been doing this for years upon years? And I wanted to have conversations specifically with Black moms about how they navigate work and motherhood, how they have those conversations, how they balance all the things, their own dreams and aspirations with the ones that they're trying to create and support for their children. So you can catch me at the Moms Hustle Different podcast, momshustledifferent.com, and Moms Hustle Different on Instagram. And I am just so grateful to have been able to have this conversation with you guys and be able I accidentally clicked it, but I'm so excited to have been able to connect with you guys and to really be able to help you all share your stories and your perspectives on this platform. And I hope that for those who are listening now and those who will listen in the future, that you got something from this conversation, that if anything, you're not alone in the conversations that you have to have with your children, the community that you have to create in your own space around your family, that you are doing all the things that you need to do and you have the support that you need. So feel free to reach out to any of us and just continue to have this conversation, and let's continue to support each other. So thank you, ladies, and thank you everyone for joining. Bye.